Thanks everyone for joining so far. Alex, Angela, Eilina, Jonathan, a few more people coming on as we speak. We're gonna get started in just a minute here. We have Kelly McLaughlin for the second portion of our class on building a year-end fundraising strategy that's designed to succeed. Very excited about getting started with today's session. So as a quick recap, Kelly has over 10 years of experience working at different nonprofits, mostly building up individual giving from the ground up. She started off with larger organizations and then pivoted towards smaller organizations to really help them build their fundraising strategy, both on and offline. So Kelly has so much experience to draw from that she's going to be sharing with us today about really building up that year-end fundraising strategy and having something that's easy to do and methodical and also really super informative and successful. So I'm looking forward to turning this over to Kelly in just a moment. As a reminder, everything's going to be recorded, so you can rewatch this later or share it with your team. And we are going to be doing a Q&A session at the end. So feel free to chat us in your questions. There's a Q&A pane as well as the chat pane. I'm going to be here monitoring that and helping out along the way. So please feel free to chat us in at any point in time. And so I think without further ado, we can kind of get started with our class for today. And Kelly, I'll leave it to you to kick it off.
All right, great. Well, thanks, Candace. Thanks everybody for joining to talk about year end. I know it feels so early to be thinking about year end, but also 2020 has been a long year, so I'm kind of ready for it to be over, right? So we're going to talk today, just to remind you, last class we talked about which channels might be right for you, the pros and cons of using different channels, how to create your online fundraising hub, how to get different channels to work together, and today we're going to dive a lot deeper into that, creating kind of a realistic timeline for your campaign and just some tools that will help you project manage your campaign. So before I kick it off, I wanted to hear from you all and just see if you could chat in. Was there anything you heard last class that was new to you, or something that was a cool aha moment, or something that it inspired last week? I just love to hear from you and see what everybody's thinking so far.
Yeah, so if you want to chat us in, anything that, just stood out to you from the last class, we'll take a look at that, and that'll be great insights and learnings that we can incorporate into our discussion today. Also, just curious, has anyone actually, I know the whole point of this is creating your fundraising plan for year end, but has anyone gotten started with year end fundraising yet? And so, just let us know what your year-end plans look like so far. So feel free to chat us in. We'd love to hear from you. And have a more interactive Q&A session later on.
Yeah, for sure. I've got one client that's already building they're building their CauseVox page this week. So
nice. That's great.
Awesome. All right, let's see.
Right.
Drafted. Right, Alex says, drafted your print appeal since she's around Veterans Day. That's cool. I like that, having a tie to a specific day.
Yeah.
And Angela, the effectiveness of telephone appeals. Yes, I think so many people, I really wrote them off until I tried one, and then it was a game changer for me. So I love that. I love telephone, and we'll talk about that a little bit more today too. Feel free to keep chatting those in if you've got other thoughts. But today, just as a reminder, today we are going to talk about keys to excellent copywriting and other ways to make your touches stand out in the crowd. And then I'm going to walk you through how to do mailed appeals on a budget. If you're really a cash-strapped organization, you can do them in-house with a little finesse. Best practice in email solicitation. So there are, again, if you take a look at your own inbox, the downside of fundraising email appeals is you've got a lot of competition, especially around year end. So we're going to talk about how to stand out there. how to incorporate social media in a meaningful way, and how to make phone calls that work. So that's today. Let me just check and see, has anybody else given us any ideas from last time? Effectiveness of direct mail, yes. Direct mail is not dead. That's we think a lot online. Online is definitely a really, really effective tool, but print mail is not dead. Until you've got folks not sending you checks anymore, it's something you want to think about. So drafting your materials, how do you tell a good story? Picking the story, I shared this slide last time, but thinking of things that make a good story. So many nonprofits I see just do their year-end appeal. It's from their board chair or it's from their ED. All the touches are from their ED. Personally, I find that extremely boring. I get real sick of those. So thinking about who all you can incorporate, what stories, what perspectives are helpful. So there's the perspectives that show the impact of your work, the firsthand or staff sharing the impact they feel they're making. There's validation by external experts, people in your community that can speak to why you're an effective organization. And then, of course, thinking outside the box to tell stories in a creative way, depending on your organization and the feel of your organization. So I like to think not just about the storyteller, what needs to be communicated, and who is the most effective storyteller for that, to make that impact on your reader. So just quickly, as a reminder, some options you've got and some examples. One is a client story. This is from Raíces, which is a big immigrant rights organization. They are telling a story of one of their clients. And what I love about telling client stories is you're telling one story to be representative of the many. So when we pepper our donors and our supporters with lots of information about our organization and our impact, often that can be a turnoff because they're thinking in the abstract. When you can bring them down to one person's story, it's almost always more effective. And so if you can talk about one person who benefited from your organization instead of a lot of people, that's really helpful. For Raíces, you can see in this example that they used a specific person. I don't know if this is the person's name or if they changed it to protect her anonymity. There's also, I talk with organizations sometimes, especially startup or newer organizations that say, like, I don't know if we have a perfect client for our story. That's where I like to do the imagined client story. So if we succeed in this campaign, who will benefit? Imagine a young child who is going through this experience, and now imagine there's a friendly adult to mentor them through that experience. That is what awaits children in our community if you give. So even if you don't have a specific person, if you can create an image for people, that can be really, really powerful. The founder's story, the story of the founding of your organization and why you serve, that can be also another effective way to tell the story of your organization. And then finally, like I said, to think outside the box, this one about the impact of climate change on my friend Harrison's dog. I love this one, and I think it's a really interesting and unique way to tell a story about climate change in a way that feels very, very concrete to people. So drafting the story, how do you draft a story? So I'm a big fan of listening to your colleagues and recording the stories as they tell it. Not that your fundraising appeal is going to be a transcription of what they say, but there's part of listening to them and recording it and being able to tell it in their voice that can really aid in the appeal. For example, you learn their speech mannerisms, you can get the nuances in voice. Perhaps they use a common phrase that you don't use so much and that you wouldn't tend to use. But especially, I like to use this for organizations that have frontline organizers or people who are often interacting with with our community, because sometimes I know I speak in a very specific way and I use very specific words. And my colleagues sometimes do not use those phrases or those words. So me attributing a story, they're telling a story using my words and my voice, and then I just put their name, slap their name at the bottom. That's not as effective. People can tell if it's somebody they've interacted with a lot. So even if, I know as fundraisers, a lot of the time we're ghost writing for our executive directors or board chairs or things like that, and you write for them all the time, recording a storytelling session with that person can be really, really powerful. And this is how I've always drafted appeals, because I think it's particularly key to get their enthusiasm and get their voice so that I can refer back to that over and over while I draft the campaign. One other thought, this is totally not something I've tried before, but something I think is worth trying given how much we are operating on Zoom right now. But now that we're doing so much Zoom, if you can do a Zoom session and use the recording feature, assuming you've told them you're going to do this and prepared them, made them aware you're going to do this, that would be a real good shortcut to creating videos for a fundraising campaign, is if you use that storytelling session to go ahead and record and create a video. Obviously you can go back and edit it later, but it's something that might be an interesting thing to try. It's something I think I'm going to try with a few of my clients this year, but just something that given our pivot to everything being virtual could be a fun thing to try this year. Then I like the question I like to share to ask them to prompt the storytelling session is to ask them the most impactful thing that happened to them this year. And just like I said, just record them talking about it and thinking about it. And then I like to draft the appeal and share with them afterwards for their input, and often for catching those things saying like, oh, I would never phrase this way, or that doesn't sound like me, or gee, that's really formal, it's not how I talk to our volunteers or whatever. So I like to make sure they see it, they've got the input on the front end and the back end. So just that's a couple tips on how to draft really powerful stories. And I also like to say, I think so many nonprofits I've worked with think that their year-end appeal has to tell the donor all the ins and outs of their organization so that the donor gets it, because when the donor gets it, that's when they give. And really, I think that's patently untrue. People give because of emotion. They give because they feel moved. What doesn't get them is that more nitty-gritty finances, management structure, all the things that that really matter to us. And of course our donors care that we're being fiscally managed correctly and all of those types of things, but that's very secondary in their choices. That's normally if you're doing high level asks and they're going to give lots of money, that's what they need to see. But for year end fundraising, I think quick short stories can also be as impactful, if not more impactful, than a big, long, detailed story. And so I particularly, I love using this example. This is from Casey Cares. It's a wonderful organization that's based in Maryland. It's so short. I mean, what you see here is their entire email. It's so short, but it's so focused on their mission. They do assume that you know their mission pretty well, but they are an organization that is very good at keeping their donors and supporters involved and informed. So I really didn't need a big, long appeal. I just needed this beautiful picture of Connor and what Casey Cares did for him. As a mom in particular, this hit me really deeply to see kids the same age as my daughter going through something difficult and having to put myself in their parents' place was, that was really, really impactful. And I think if they'd done more storytelling and a longer narrative and everything, the emotional impact might have been less, depending on how they told the story. So people think it needs to be long-winded, but this is just I think this is a really beautiful campaign. And they just sent these 2 or 3 times a week. So I'll give you a couple other examples of what they sent out. This is another in the series. You don't even know what Lamarian is going through, what challenge, but if you know this organization, you know He's probably been in and out of the hospital. He's probably got some really complex disease that his family is dealing with. And so just that quote from his mom, the relief, and all of that was something that, again, it hit me as a mom really hard. And then this last one, here again, the copy is really, really simple, but it's really, really powerful. And if you really know your audience and you really know what they care about, it's easy to make it short and sweet and high impact. But yeah, the main reason I love this series and I hold it up as a good fundraiser is they show how convincing you can be in 3 paragraphs. And as a donor, I really appreciated not having to read a ton of content before getting to a donate button. I got a great picture. I got a very short story. I've got a picture of what Bella and her family is going through, and I want to donate. And I like here, they've got the donate button up top, they've got the donate button on the bottom. I think the only thing I would do to change this is make the donate button at the bottom orange so that they're the same color. But really, I mean, that's such a small thing, but I loved this campaign series. They ran it last year for year end, and I loved it. I wish I could share all of the emails they sent. They were really beautiful. So then goals and giving levels. If you can tie your organization's year-end goal and the story you are telling, if you can tie that together, all the better. Another way to tell your story is by using the giving levels to tell the story. So the amount that you're asking for, why are you asking for that amount? Even that can be part of your case for support. So I'm not asking for a generic $100, I'm asking for $100 to feed a family for a week. Having that kind of specific impact metric associated with your giving levels is really, really powerful. Again, if you're using CauseVox as your year-end giving hub, you can do that very easily with their back end. So I know a lot of people in the nonprofit world think that that's really hard, but it doesn't have to be. It's hard because we get a little pedantic about it. Because we might not use that $100 to feed a family. We might use that money to pay our program director. It might go to salary. This campaign is to raise general support. How can we say $100 is going to feed a family? Like, I get that, but donors don't get super into the weeds like that. What you're trying to communicate is what is the cost to deliver the impact that you're talking about in this campaign. And if you want to, I mean, I worked with one organization where we did kind of a fund a day at our organization. It was a performing arts organization. We really leaned into the I Am Overhead campaign. So this was back in 2017. And GuideStar and a few other watchdog organizations were running this campaign called I Am Overhead. And so it was talking about how donors don't tend to give to overhead and how that was actually really dangerous and hurtful for organizations because you did need to fund, an accountant. As boring as that might be, the organizations need that to be well managed. And so we really leaned into that campaign. And we found that supporters who loved that organization, they didn't appreciate all that the organization was providing to the community for free. And so we really leaned into that I Am Overhead campaign to educate supporters about what went into the community program that organization was running. So for example, so this was the Art House Theater. I've used their examples a lot because I've worked with them for quite a few years. But we had this campaign slogan that was, "We're more than the multiplex." And the whole idea was we were talking about how the organization was mission driven and not profit driven, that if you wanted to just see a movie, you can go to one of the multiplexes in our area. But if you wanted community, then that's why you should come to our theater. And so giving levels, for example, one of our giving levels was $15. And we tied that to, that's an hour's wage for one of our concessions workers because we believe in paying a living wage. That was something that a lot of our supporters we actually found didn't realize that organization had done. They didn't understand that in addition to being a community organization, we were trying to fight for better wages in our community, that we were an employer that that was working on that. And so we tied that $15 an hour wage to our year-end campaign on the IM overhead to make that point to our community. So that was part of telling the story that we were telling. And so if you can tie your giving levels or your goal to something like that, it can be very powerful. So as I'm saying that, I know some organizations this is easier than others. So if you want to go ahead and in the chat box, tell me what are some giving level ideas or impact metrics like that that you can think of for your organization. While you're chatting that in, I'll just say my last dirty little secret on the giving levels. I tend to make the bottom level something kind of boring and get increasingly compelling as you go up. So for one organization, an advocacy organization that I worked with, I used the lowest level was that pays for yard signs for one of our upcoming advocacy campaigns. And yes, yard signs were really important. It was a strategy that we did use that was important to our organization. But at the same time, why do I want to be the dope paying for yard signs when $50 more means I'm the person paying for the next volunteer training? I like that better. I'm going to opt for that. So that's something I do use sometimes to set those giving levels. So let's see. Storytelling across channels. So how do you spread your story across channels? This is something I kind of alluded to in the last one, but I want to talk about that more specifically. So I'm going to show you how I did this for the Old Greenbelt Theater. Just to give you a little context, we were running a special capital campaign to expand from a single screen cinema, which was what this organization was using, was this historic art house cinema. And we were expanding to a second screening room and building out a media arts literacy lab to do educational programming, which was a part of the organization's mission that they had up to that point not really been able to fulfill because they didn't have a space that was appropriate. So the campaign had launched in March 2019. We expected it to take 18 months, but by October 2019, we were really, really close to the goal for the capital campaign. So that was only 6 months. And we decided instead of doing the year-end campaign to be what it normally was, which was that overhead campaign that I was mentioning earlier, we decided to close out the year-end appeal with that. Did I get somebody commenting about, $450 pays for a full year membership with our after school program for one youth. I like that, that's good. I think something like that is a really impactful metric where you say this is the cost of providing something to one person. I really, really like that. Thanks, Angela. All right, so this is a visual layout of the campaign. I used this graphic in the last class, but I've modified it for you to show you what we decided to use for this organization. So we had our online fundraising hub that had a ton of information about the capital campaign, about architectural renderings, blueprints, drawings that an artist had created of the space for us, all kinds of stuff like that. And then our main channels was email. You see email's pretty big there. And then we had a little component that was direct mail. We used a phone campaign to support our email and direct mail campaign, and social media to kind of drive to email and to our online fundraising hub. So this is the visual that I had in my head when we were crafting this campaign together. So this is an example of the direct mail appeal that we used. Like I said, we wrote it from the perspective of the theater. So the Old Greenbelt Theater was the special representative of Friends of Greenbelt Theater, which was a fun thing that our donors really liked. We created this handwriting text for the theater, which was quite fun. So it looked like the theater, because it matched the signature, had written to each of our donors. And then we look at these storytelling points. I didn't want to miss an opportunity to write you a little note to tell you how much the Friends of Greenbelt Theater have meant to me. We did some, here are things that they've done, that they've brought back into the community, or that they've created in the community. And then at the top of the second page, we talked about, we tried to personalize it a little bit. Maybe you don't notice it, but my marquee burns a little brighter when you come to visit. And then we have these this call out. Now I have a favor to ask. Would you make a small donation of 10, 20, 50 or more to the Friends of Greenbelt Theater? So this was the campaign we sent in 2018. And then we built on that with the capital campaign for 2019. And so this was, again, it was from OG Theater. It was the same handwriting. And we explained a lot about the capital campaign here, but reflected the language from the prior year. And it's OG Theater is somebody that organization pulls out a lot for our emails and that kind of thing. So this direct mail was kind of the basis of the storytelling. We've got the whole narrative of why we want to do that, what it's going to fulfill in the organization's mission, and how we're hoping to raise it by the end of the year. Then we used emails to build on the direct mail campaign and to build a narrative on its own. So we took that story and we took the elements. What are the main things we need to communicate? How much growth we've experienced, how far we've come in 5 years as an organization. On our second capital campaign, because our first was successful and we kept getting people coming forward saying they wish they could have contributed to that. And we've got people who are who really care that there's this educational component of our mission that we really haven't been able to fulfill. So those are the things that we want to communicate. So the direct mail appeal hit all of those points, and we did it in that creative way by being a narrative written by the building. But then we broke that same narrative out and we thought about who are our best people for telling these different components. So the first email, this actually went out before the direct mail appeal hit, was from the founder that talked about how far the organization had come, updating supporters on where we were with that capital campaign and what we were trying to do with it. We did a second email that was from the development director that talked about the giving levels, what they would do for the capital campaign. And then this organization also had a very, very technical match and tax credits thing that they'd worked out with the state of Maryland. And so we sent out an email that was much more technical from the development director that was, here's how to take advantage of all of these things. The third email was again from OG Theater, and it was a very, very shortened form of the mailed appeal with lots of pictures and the architectural renderings again. And the direct mail, we had put in a flyer with the architectural renderings as well as the letter. And then the fourth email was from the board chair about why she had given kind of the lead gift to this campaign. And so she was, both as the board chair and a major donor to the organization, was kind of this external validator. She's also a very well-known person in the community that this art house theater serves. So it was doing a lot of duty having that come from the board chair. And then we broke out, again, all of those components we broke out with the visuals. So all these visuals people would have recognized from the collateral and the images that were going out with the direct mail and with the emails. And so this social media had the architectural renderings of the new space with specific updates. As you can see, this thermometer that we created out of a film strip. How much we'd raised and the impact on the mission if we raised that money. So you can see on the right bottom that growing OGT kids programming, what this campaign was going to do for the organization. I'll say specifically for this campaign, we'd found in the past that the organization didn't have a ton of success driving fundraising results on social media. Because they do serve an older donor population that preferred to give via check, but we tended to time social media to reflect the email campaigns that were going out, so that if anyone saw the email and then was on social later, it reinforced that. And we did get comments on our social that was like, oh, I saw this email, forgot to give, going to the website now. So we did find that giving that way was, or structuring it that way worked for this organization. So that's, again, know your organization and know what's going to work for you and where you're going to drive things. But essentially we used the social media component to build up a case for support over time. using images and social posts that about what the new space would do for the organization's mission. So that's just some examples. You can see we have a graphic that we created for Giving Tuesday with a specific Giving Tuesday post and goal. So that's, we'll talk about Giving Tuesday a little bit later. And then this was the voicemail script. So having a really good voicemail script, if you're doing a call campaign, is really important. Try and make sure it stays under about 1 minute to say everything you need to say. We leaned into specific numbers because it was changing every single day. And so we would update that call script with the numbers every day that people were making those calls, which was fun and exciting and exhausting all at the same time. Oops. All right, and then the in-person script. That is something that I like to use. I don't know how many of you are 80s babies, but I loved those choose your own adventure books, and that's how I like to script my in-person scripts. So I like to say there are lots of yes, no points out, and there also needs to be good opt-out points for your donors. So the more you can have someone say yes and yes and yes again, I like to think that builds up. They're more primed to say yes when you get to that ask. But if you just barrel through with a pitch and finally give them a chance to speak at the end, they often won't say yes because they're trying to say the thing they wanted to say 10 sentences ago. So this is something that I like to have short, quick things that they can say yes to. So I'm wondering if you have a moment to speak with me. Yes, I do. Wonderful. Do you recall receiving our letter about the Beyond the Screen initiative? Yes, I do. Great. Do you have any questions about the initiative? So very, very short and sweet. We also found we got through them faster if we just checked to make sure the donor had seen this stuff. I would say about 8 out of 10 calls, the donor was like, yep, seen it, seen the social, seen the emails, keep forgetting to give. But since you've called me, great, let me just give you my credit card number. So we used the calls to really do that one-on-one touch and make sure that people had no excuses basically to not have given because we were right there ready to take their credit card number. And then the main thing you need for a good phone call interaction with your donors is an easy way for donors to give if they want to give. As you'll see here, I've got a lot of options. You can read through this when Candace sends the slides out. But I made sure that we had options for if they've got a credit card, they can the donors had all been trained to put that into the back end of our CRM. If it was a check, we said, great, thanks so much. How much can we expect? I'm gonna put it down. Do you still have the remittance envelope that we sent? No, okay, great, I'll send you a new one. And then if they didn't want to give by phone, I will say some people don't want to give by phone, and that's fine because they don't want to give you their credit card number. They're wary of scams. That's totally reasonable, I think. So often what I would do is say, oh, okay, well, are you by your computer? Okay, great. Here's the URL. Can you go there and make your donation? I'll be right here on the phone in case you experience any issues, so that we could make sure that that was coming in one way or the other. So that's kind of how we built that narrative over all of those platforms and how we made it work together. Then the branding, making it visually cohesive is really important. So make sure all your elements work together. I like to make sure there's one kind of pop color that's gonna pull it all together. If you've got a logo, using your logo in a creative way. So as you can see here, we've got the organization's logo, and then we just written the name of the campaign in kind of cool font around the logo. So we didn't create anything super special, but it was recognizable because we put it on everything we sent out. And then we use specific pictures and images over and over again. And then of course, font matters. You need to pick one font and stick with it, or a headline font and a text font, but you don't want to be doing different fonts across a lot of different images. So just a couple notes on the visual branding. So keys to excellent copywriting. What makes somebody want to give? So Tom Ahern is kind of a leading thought leader in fundraising copywriting, and he did this big study studying the emotions that were most responsible for giving, and found actually quite a few were negative: fear, guilt, anger, that kind of thing. Mal Warwick did a similar study and found some more positive emotional triggers in his research. But what we're kind of seeing the research coalesce around is the main emotions that drive fundraising giving is fear, greed, guilt, anger, exclusivity, salvation, flattery, hope, love, compassion, duty, and faith. So I just think that's really, really interesting. Those are the emotions that tend to trigger giving. And so how can you think about ways to use your copywriting to trigger those emotions? If you want to learn more about that, Tom Ahern's book, How to Write Fundraising Materials That Raise More Money, is an excellent resource to read through. It's a very, very quick read. And so all of the copywriting tools I'm going to tell you have mostly been studied under direct mail, just because that's what we have the most data and research on. But I think they absolutely apply to email and social. So anything I'm saying, you can think about how to apply it to other areas. So one thing I find really, really interesting is studies of donors have shown that people read appeals in very specific ways. Very few people actually read the entire appeal. So I know myself, when I first started out writing fundraising copy, I was like, oh, I've built this beautiful narrative and it's wonderful. And then I wasn't getting the results I wanted. And then when I read these studies about the studies and where donors actually read, I was like, oh, that's why, because it doesn't make any sense when the way I've built out the narrative doesn't jive with the way people read. So a couple ways people read. The first way people read is first paragraph and PS only. So if you're thinking about, oh, I've written this amazing direct mail appeal, most of your donors are going to read the first paragraph and your PS. And so you want to make sure that those are heavy hitters. So for this example, we used, you would think that celebrating an 80th birthday would make a theater feel old, but I've got to tell you, I'm feeling younger, more alive, and more full of energy than I have in a very long time, and I owe that to you. And then our PS was, I'm so looking forward to rewatching my favorite holiday, my holiday favorite, It's a Wonderful Life. It's showing at 11 a.m. on December 1st. Won't you join me? You can bring your donation with you and save yourself the stamp. So when a donor opens that, they get a thank you, they get a, hey, bring a donation, and an envelope. And that was our way of saying, like, bring this, come to this free showing, and you can give us your donation. The main reason we used that as the PS was we used that free screening every year as a big fundraising opportunity. So it was a free screening, but once we had everybody in the door, we did a lot of fundraising around the event. So another way people read is anything that's in special font, bold, underlined, or italicized. So I've got a couple ways you can do that. One, we use that handwriting option to call attention to a couple elements. Or in this appeal, you can see we used bold to tell different portions of the story. So I've got a kid sister. We want to help our little pop-up grow into a state-of-the-art screening room and a one-of-a-kind media arts literacy lab, but we need you. Could you make a gift of support today to help us reach our goal by New Year's Eve? Will you take a read and then send back the enclosed envelope with your gift and maybe a pledge for 2022? So again, here we go. The bold tells most of that story. It gives you the Cliff's Notes version of the appeal. But if you leave all the font the same, people don't know where to look. What's the most important portion of this appeal? And then the last one is a little more tricky, and I'm not going to read this all to you, but would encourage you to take a look at appeals that you're writing to see if this flows the right way. the first sentence in every paragraph is the other way that people read through appeals. Email, direct mail, any of that, the first sentence of every paragraph. So go ahead and whatever you've drafted in the past, take a look and see if I just read the first sentence of every paragraph, do I get the full story? That is also part of why I recommend very short paragraphs so that you can break it up a little more and pull the donor's eye to important things that maybe would have been in the middle of a paragraph, but just, you know, hit that enter key, make it the next paragraph. Direct mail and good fundraising copy doesn't always follow, and in fact, almost always flies counter to what you learned in English class in high school. So just keep that in mind. So then the donor as the protagonist. When I'm building a story, something I always want to do is have the donor as the protagonist. So I want you to put in the chat, if you want, read each of these opposing sentences. Your gift today will help us feed 10 children, or you could feed 10 children with your gift today. Or the second one, you helped us end fracking in Maryland, versus you ended fracking in Maryland. These are pulled from appeals that I've worked on. So I am curious to see which you think is more powerful. So as you tell your story, what I want you to remember is your organization is not the protagonist. Your donor is the protagonist. So read some of the appeals you've gotten from other organizations and see how it makes you feel. Let's see, I've got the ones on the right. Yes, Angela. Yeah, you could feed 10 children. You ended fracking. These are things that it helps them feel inspired. If it gets you excited, then it's gonna help get your donor inspired. Here again, like with the giving levels, I find we get a little pedantic, like my donor didn't do the work, I did the work, we did the work. But what I like to challenge organizations that say that to me is, I say, could you have done that work if you had no money? So flip that narrative around. The donor is the protagonist. The donor is the one, they're the reason you can do that work. So talk to them with that in mind. That is true. The donor is who gets the work done. One further note, I will say, I think this is even more important in the wake of the pandemic, with so much going on in our world and so much of that out of our hands. I think people are feeling very, very powerless right now. And so I like to say that donating is power. Donating is about using the money you have to make a difference in the world. And I want you to give that power back to your donors as much as possible. So make them see that donating to you creates change, and give them that power, because right now I think that feeling of being in control or having the ability to make a difference is really, really important to people. So I think that's doubly true right now with the pandemic. So a couple other minor notes, laws of attraction. People really like seeing their name. So with mail merge features, it's really easy to do that. Often I'll see, dear Kelly, great, you mail merged it. And then I don't see my name anywhere else. One place that copywriting studies has shown makes a difference is if you say, instead of, could you make a gift of $25 today, mail merge their name in front of that. Kelly, could you make a gift of $25 today? People know the mail merge feature exists, and so we think it's like, oh, I'm not going to pull anything over on people, but it actually, people are their eyeballs are attracted to their name. So add their name where there's an important point that you want to make sure that they read. People also like seeing the word you. So a lot of copywriting experts say you should have twice as many yous in your appeal as we or me or I or your organization's name. So, and that's a very easy thing to keep score on. So make sure that you do that. And then finally, your PS is critical. All kinds of studies have shown if your appeal gets read, not at all, almost everybody reads the PS. most people read the PS first. So it's a really critical point to make your ask, or say, this is time sensitive. Can you send back your gift by December 24th? Things like that. Make your PS, leverage your PS to make your appeal sound timely and important. And that's more true for direct mail than it is for emails, but I think emails having a PS is also a powerful thing, because if somebody just scrolls right through it and sees a PS, they are going to read that. So personalize. With mail merge features, there's not a lot of excuses to not personalize, at least the name. Other things I like to personalize is their last gift and a giving chain. So I might say, your last gift was $25. This year, could you make a gift of $35, $50, or $100? And then let's say the last person's gift was $50. Their giving chain would turn into 75, 100, or 150. Having that last gift and giving chain be personalized to that person's giving can be a really powerful way to make that solicitation. Gift level impact metric is important, and if you can personalize that's just kind of next level. And then if you can segment it into how those people came to you, your event donors might get slightly different messaging than the people who have given to you through your website, get something different from people who gave to your last year end appeal. Personalizing it that way and more segmenting is also really a powerful tool. It makes people feel seen and heard and appreciated at a different level. So how do you stand out in the inbox or the mailbox? For mailed appeals, photos, color, faces, eyes are really, really important. Creating handwriting graphics is also another fun way to make them stand out. Actually, handwriting on appeals is another level. This is something I love doing with board members, is divvying up my year-end appeals and giving them to board members to handwrite on, even if it's a thing simple like, thanks for being a donor, love the board chair. That's a really great way to get people to pay attention to your appeals. Writing personal notes to the donors you know is a helpful thing to personalize, and also handwriting on the envelopes. Just a simple thanks on the back, seal can be something that stops them from throwing that in the trash. Direct mail on a budget, I realize I'm running out of time, but it's something that you can do. I would recommend you start small. You need to order remittance envelopes. That's one thing you do have to do out of house. And I would recommend you looking into that as soon as possible, because sometimes the turnaround times are long. You can mail merge it, draft the letter and the letter and the address labels. You can mail merge and print in-house if you have a decent printer. And then stuff and stamp. If you're starting with a small batch to see if this is something that works for your organization, just doing 50 to 100 letters, you can do that in a few hours on your own or with one other volunteer. So it's definitely something that you could try if you start small, and 50 to 100 letters isn't going to tax many printers at this point. So something to give a try. Email copywriting. All of the tips I've talked about apply to emails. One thing I will say is make sure you've got at least one ask that's above the fold. We usually mean that to mean where your appeal is folded. But for email, it's when you get that in your inbox, is there an ask that I can see without having to scroll down? And then I love email appeals that have donate buttons at the top, at the bottom, somewhere in the middle. Make sure those donate buttons stand out, because if they don't read anything else, they will see that donate button. Then email subject. I like to avoid the words, my typo, help, support, give, or donate. I try to avoid those words because you're not going to get an open, you're going to get a delete. Here are some that I've used in the past that have gotten decent open rates. Go ahead, make my day. I use that with the Art House Cinema. We use a lot of movie lines as subject subject lines for fundraising emails. I can see this is the start of a beautiful friendship, things like that. We use those a lot. So if there's something cool that you could link to your organization, that's one thing you could do. Another subject line, the one thing you can do today to stop climate change. Talking about giving donors power, we got a ton of opens on that because I think donors were like, oh, okay, how do I stop climate change today? Or urgent, we're running out of time. I caution you from using that urgent unless you're using it close to the end of the year or if there's a deadline you have to meet to get a match. But using something like that, not urgent, give today, that goes in the delete. But urgent, we're running out of time can be a powerful subject line. Then who the email is from can matter. I like to not use the organization name. I like to, if the email is from Joe, our community organizer, then the from name is Joe. So making sure it's maybe a name that people will recognize, but that feels more personal. Oh, Joe emailed me. I know Joe because I've attended a volunteer training with Joe, so I'm going to open this. So if it's just your organization name, that gets boring and people delete it because they're like, ugh, I don't want to hear from them today. But varying up the name can be really, really helpful. If you've signed up for political emails recently, I know at least the Biden campaign has been sending lots of things from different celebrities and that kind of thing, because I'm deleting Joe Biden's emails sometimes, but then I get an email from somebody that you're like, what, why is that name in my email inbox? And I open that one just to see what it is. So, so thinking about that email of how do you do, not for a bait and switch, make sure it's actually from that person, right? But how do you vary that up so that somebody can, so it's not just your organization's name and I'm just, ugh, I don't want to hear from them today. Social media, having graphics that are branded, that have a visual match to the rest of the campaign is really helpful. Canva is a tool online that is free to nonprofits that you can use to create really great social media. They have awesome templates that you can build your campaign around, so that's, they're quite helpful. I like to use sections of emails with quote graphics sometimes, or a picture of a client with a testimonial quote from them. Those can be really powerful ways to draw attention on social media. I like to pair email send out with related social, as I mentioned before, because maybe somebody saw the email, didn't give to the email, they're on our Facebook later, and it reminds them, oh yeah, I want to go back and give, or I want to give here now that I've seen it twice. As I said, client, volunteer, donor pictures with testimonials is a great graphic and way to use social media. I like to vary asks with requests for sign up for emails, just because some people who might not be willing to give just yet will sign up for an email, and then you've got that captured audience that you can keep sending email solicitations to. So it's a way to add to your email list. I also make sure you're doing thank you posts along the way. And sometimes with donors who know the organizations well, I will ask those donors, hey, can I tag you on a social media post? Because that can be a compelling thing when I just say, hey, so-and-so gave to this campaign, thanks so much. You tag them, and then other people who are considering giving say, oh, that's really cool, like I want a shout out like that. So that's something that can be powerful on social media as well. Then Giving Tuesday. The downside of Giving Tuesday is there's lots and lots of competition, and I'm seeing more and more organizations kind of opt out of Giving Tuesday. My advice is don't ignore it, but also don't expect it to be magic. My other advice is incorporate Giving Tuesday into your year-end campaign, but don't plan it as a campaign unto itself. I see a lot of organizations making that mistake is I have a very specific Giving Tuesday campaign, and that's separate from my year-end campaign. And because there's so much going on at this time of year, that's creating a lot of work you don't need. So the example I showed you earlier with the Old Greenbelt Theater, we had this bigger campaign, and then we had a Giving Tuesday specific goal and a Giving Tuesday specific drive on social media, but it was part of that bigger year-end campaign that we were doing. Giving Tuesday is also a great day to prime current donors to share your content. Something I like to do is if I launch our campaign, you know, a few weeks before Giving Tuesday, the people who give up until that point, I will send an email a few days before Giving Tuesday and say, hey, here's some graphics, here's the URL, here's stuff that you can share about our organization. Could you share it on Giving Tuesday and tag us and drive your friends to our campaign? So that's something I really like to use Giving Tuesday for, is leveraging your current donors to be ambassadors for your mission elsewhere. So that's something I love doing with social media. And then finally, phone campaigns. My suggestions on phone campaigns, voicemail script. It needs to be quick, who you are, what the organization is, quick update from your work or impact metric. Hope you're considering giving again. You can do so here. I'll try you again in a few days. That's a great voicemail script. For an in-person script, like I said, you're going to get all these slides afterwards so you can look at the materials that I showed earlier. But the live person script, build a series of yes. So do you have a minute? If they say no, make sure you ask when's a better time for me to call back. But get them to say yes. Do you have a minute? Yes. Do you believe in our mission? Yes. Do you know that we do critical work in your community? Yes. Do you want to be a part of that impact? Yes. Okay, great. Can you make a gift? Hopefully you'll have built up that narrative well, and when you ask for a gift, they'll say yes. Of course, this year, I think with the pandemic, we're all very concerned about upsetting people or people who have been laid off or are unemployed. The thing that I would advise there is have a secondary ask. Oh, you can't donate, you've been laid off. I'm so sorry to hear that. Instead, could you do this thing for us? That will have a huge impact. Thanks so much. I haven't in the past done things like that, but I think that's very appropriate right now given kind of the economic realities that we're in. Another thing, when to call, I tend to do between 2 and 4 p.m. during the work week. I find that's kind of a work slump, and on the weekend it's a good time. You're not expecting people to be early birds, people who like to sleep in, you're not going to disturb them. So 2 to 4 is a great time period to call, whether weekdays or weekends. And like I said, I love using board members for phone campaigns. I think it says something really important to donors if your board members can make these calls. But do make sure you train them well. Do some practice rounds. Make sure they run through the script a few times. Make sure that, you know, run through the script a couple times and you say yes, no at different points, and make sure they've got a decent reaction to both of those options at the different points. So as we reach the top of the hour, I'll just remind you what we're doing next, the next session on Thursday. We're going to talk about some pre-campaign cultivation that you can do to make sure that your campaign is successful, how to measure success and create targets for your campaign. I find that creating targets for a campaign is one of the hardest things to do. When you need to course correct in your campaign, when you know it is or isn't working, some key dates you should keep in mind, and I'll dive a little deeper into Giving Tuesday as well. And we'll talk about that plan template that I showed you in the first session, how to take everything we've talked about and put that all together for your organization. And Candace will also supply that plan to you after the next session. So I also am hoping to do an extended Q&A at our next session so that you can ask any and all of your questions. But for now, I will wrap up and see if we have any questions that have come in. Candace?
Thanks so much, Kelly. This was so good. I was taking some notes myself, actually. So,
Oh.
well, this has been a really great session just to learn all of these insights as far as just planning all of your content around year end. I think that's really one of the things that is most important. It's not just, making sure you're communicating at the right times, it's also having the right communication. So, yeah. So, thank you, Kelly. And yeah, like Kelly said, so during our next class, we're going to be going over actually constructing your plan for year end. And so we're going to have a template and basically like a spreadsheet, Google Sheet, you'll be able to download and input your own plans on. And so we'll be getting that to you during our next class. Also, Kelly, I wanted to see, you shared so many great examples. I know I'm going to be including the slideshow in the follow-up email that goes out tomorrow. So that'll be great. You all will get the follow-up email and the slides, but you use so many great examples, especially of, some of those emails and scripts that you were going over. And so I was hoping, would you be able to go ahead and put some of those examples that you shared into like a PDF so they're like a little bigger and easier to read?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And then I'll also include that in the follow-up email, so it's a little bit easier just to quickly see some examples.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that would be great. And yeah, I want to open it up to questions. I know there's one or two already. But yeah, so how about for anyone here, do you have any challenges that you're looking to overcome when it comes to creating this type of content for your year-end giving? And so, or any unique things from your organization specifically that you feel like you're trying to work with when it comes to year end. And so, of course, any other questions that you have, please feel free to chat them in, but we would love to get more specific with you about your year end plans. And so, anyone that also wants to be unmuted to ask your question, we would love to just have you on here. You can just use the little raise hand feature and or just chat me and let me know if you want to be unmuted and we can have a quick little discussion about your question. So I know, let's see, there's the chat pane. I'm going to open that up, or the Q&A pane rather. Give me one moment. Kelly, do you see the Q&A pane on your end?
I am not able to pull it up right now. That's very, oh wait. How do you find a target audience for direct mail for your organization? We don't want to send out direct mail to people who don't care about our mission. Okay, this is from Tasha's Furry Friends. How do you find a target audience for your direct mail? I tend to use direct mail only for current donors. It's something that I like to use to reactivate donors who have not given in a while. It's something I like to use to remind people of what their giving was last year. But some organizations will go the route of buying mailing lists through a mail house. Almost all the data I've seen on that, I've never tried it myself because I've just never worked with an organization that felt the need to do that. But the data on that is very poor. It has very, very low results. So if you're thinking about who it is in your database, your current donors that you might want to send direct mail to, I would say if you have very limited bandwidth and money, the first thing I would do is pull a list of everybody who's given by check. That's kind of the main trigger to know that this person probably would benefit from a direct mail appeal. The reason for that is you tend to want to target people where you get them. So for example, I'm a millennial. I hate getting direct mail myself. And organizations I feel like shouldn't send me direct mail because I always give online. Even if I get a direct mail appeal, I get on their website and I donate there. So that's exactly why you want to solicit people where you're going to get them. If you send me an email, I'm going to get on your website. If I see your social media post, I'm going to get on your website. I'm very much an online giver. People who send you checks are likely people who don't like to give online. And so those are your targets for your year-end direct mail appeal. So that's something that I like using, is if you don't have the money to just send it to everybody in your database, pull a list of people who tend to give by check or who gave by check in the last year, and that would be the right audience to target with a direct mail appeal.
All right, any more questions? See, Alex had to run, but he said thank you for today's webinar. So as a reminder, we'll see you all on Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern. You're going to get that invite today for Thursday's class. And so we'll be doing our third installment, and I'm really excited for the next class as well. I think we had maybe one more question.
Yeah, one more question. Anonymous says, how do you successfully educate donors on the importance of donation for your organization's overhead? I like to, as in the example that I shared before, with the organization that was paying their front of house and concessions to get people a living wage, having something like that helped us to show the overhead. Another metric we used was that organization does a lot of projecting 35 millimeter film. That means they have to pay a projectionist. That means that they have to use really specialized equipment that is a power suck because it has not been modernized. And so, yes, when we show these specialty films that are rare prints on the original 35 millimeter print, that has a lot of cost associated with it. And that's something that people don't think about because we live in the era of Netflix. And so if you can call attention to that overhead and what the overhead does to support your mission, that can be really, really helpful. I shy away from things like, we pay the accountant this much to do our money. So that's why we need that money. That's much harder to justify. That's much harder to get people excited about. But if you think about, one example is an organization I worked with did some of that messaging around overhead of, we're going to be transparent. We hired 2 fundraisers this year because we are on a growth mission. And so we are paying the people to support our institutional growth now because we don't want to do it backwards. That was something that that organization really leaned into, was we are doing institution building because we need to meet this need. And so, yes, we hired a fundraiser. Yes, you might see that as overhead, but this is where that fundraiser is going to get us in the next few years. That was something that donors really appreciated, and particularly we used that solicitation with a lot of the major donors for that organization, and major donors were they really liked that. They were like, oh, I see, yes, it's an additional salary, but I can see how that's going to grow your mission. Yes, that's something I'm willing to give towards. So I think if you can show the impact of the overhead, that's really, really helpful. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool.
One more actually that just came in. Kelly, I know we're a little over time, but do you mind?
I'm fine, yeah.
I think I can't quite see it at the moment, but if you'd be able to
do you need me to pull it up? Okay. One of the spaces in which we work involves the mental health needs of vulnerable populations. How do we navigate the tightrope between telling their stories without violating their right to privacy and HIPAA? Yes, there are a couple ways you can do that. One, changing names and circumstances. So creating kind of a client profile I see organizations do this. I've worked with organizations working with kids who are considered vulnerable populations. So instead of showing pictures of those kids and that kind of thing, sometimes it will be a picture of a group of children from behind so that you can't see faces. Sometimes we will build kind of a client profile and we'll put a little asterisk next to the first mention of their name and say, you know, this person's name has been changed to protect their anonymity. And often when I do that, it's an amalgamation of maybe a couple clients that that tells a story well, but that is still representative. I'm not lying. I'm not making up an impact story. I'm using a couple clients to make the narrative a little murky so it's harder to identify a specific person. Of course, if you're going to share that person's story, even in part, I would check in with them and see if that's okay. Something I've seen a lot right now in forums on diversity, equity, and inclusion is offer to financially compensate that person or otherwise ensure that, like, if I'm going to make money off of telling your story, I want to make sure that you feel like you have control over that story. You get to look at the drafts. You get to tell me what I can and can't share. It makes it a much more cumbersome process, but at the same time, you obviously don't want somebody to feel used. I mean, of course, always, always, always ask permission, but then things I've been seeing more and more these days, which I really am glad we're talking about this more, is what are ways you can compensate them for sharing their story, whether that's money, whether that's additional support, whether that, I mean, it's something that is going to be very individual. So when you go to those clients, having that individual conversation of, you know, your story is so inspiring, we would really like to share it, and I want to see if that's okay with you and how, under what terms you're comfortable with that. So that's something absolutely that I've been seeing more and more chat about. I also, if you're working with clients that, for example, somebody working with foster children, an organization working with foster children, we crafted a narrative that was, imagine you're 18 and alone. You're aging out of the foster care system. You've never had an adult mentor. Now imagine there's somebody there to hold your hand while you make these big decisions. That's not a person, that's not an individual, that's not a client they've served, but we're putting the donor in the shoes of a client. Imagine, create this narrative where the donor is the client. This is what it feels like. This is what you've gone through. Now imagine our organization is there and we're there with this kind of care. You know, now you can move forward confidently. Now you can do this. Now you can do that. So it's another way to tell a story without disclosing anybody's identity or anybody's personal details. And I find that that's, at least I love reading stories like that because I think they're really, really powerful to create that empathy and put the donor in those shoes. So that's, again, if you're dealing with HIPAA, if you're dealing with vulnerable populations, people who maybe don't want their stories told, I find that that's a very, very powerful way to tell those stories as well. One final thing is I would also talk to that person about, could we send the appeal from you? You're in charge of this. It's your narrative. I'll work with you to draft your story. But I find a lot of the time it's the organization talking about a client, whereas I've seen a few examples of when an organization sends it like as a request from the client, and that I think putting the client in that driver's seat of flipping the narrative of, this is somebody who we have you know, who needs our help, to this is a person who is now empowered and advocating for our organization, can also be pretty powerful.
I'm muted. All right. Thank you so much, Kelly. This whole class has been fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for your great questions. I think all of those are really applicable to a lot of different organizations that are in the same boat, you know. So this has been such a great class. I really look forward to the next one. It's going to be also great. Just as a quick reminder as well, we are going to do an extended Q&A next time, so feel free to come prepared ahead with questions,
Mhm.
and we'll get to as many of them as we can. So thanks, Kelly, for staying on a little extra today.
Ah,
And yeah, thank you again, and I'll be following up with that recording of today's class, as well as the examples from the slides as well. Okay, great. Well, thanks, Kelly. Thanks,
thanks,
everybody.
Candace. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Birthday. Yeah. Bye.